Maybe this time you but and from let's say but this might be saying
Recording in progress.
Nee toch? Kijk, als ik het scherm...
What is impossible? No, maybe. A bit. I don't know, okay.
Deze staat geswitcht, deze is verkocht. Je moet zo meteen die... dat werkt wel voor... Heb jij die volgende die PowerPoint, waar zitten die alle... Ja, hier, dit is vol. Panel discussion hebben we nog jammer nog, hè? Nee, dat is deze. Hier bij hem vooral. Oh, dan is het hierna. Oh. En wel meeting komt hierna. En ook vandaag op deze. Dan is het 13. Ja, 13. Ja. Maar, oh, je komt daar wel. Ja. Okay. Ja, maar je bedoelt zo net zo online dat je klaar hebt.
doe het goed, hè?
Staat 1 seconde. Ja, hij staat aan. Hij stond aan. Ja, hij stond aan.
Yes. When there is a call.
Yeah. You want to respond?
Here, Lulu will be connected.
And wait, and then Sanyan. Hello, yeah. Okay, hello everybody. We're gonna get started. My name is Ruth Aguilera, and I'm joined here by Alessandro Satoni. Thank you all for sacrificing your coffee and being here. We are also joined online by, a lot of some people at least, and please don't forget that this conference continues next Saturday online, and we have a new set of papers, etc. Floor. All right, so this is the order of business. We do not have a lot of time, and we have quite a few things to accomplish, and this is the order of business. You can see here, okay? Way is online as well, right? Yeah. All right, so the first thing that I'll do is a little bit, I am the chair of the board of directors, and Alessandro, as you know, he's the president of the International Corporate Governance Society. Just for those of you, there are a few of you who are new to the society. ICGS is a non-profit educational organization. And in addition to everything that you see here in the slide, when I try to talk to people about the organization, my pitch for it is that we are an interdisciplinary organization. So we like to include legal scholars, accounting, sociology, strategy, finance, etc. So we are a very interdisciplinary organization, very international, and also very inclusive, as well as having different goals. Now somebody shut me down. No. So having different goals, which is, obviously research, because that's our currency in our profession, obviously research, but also trying to develop trying to improve our teaching or share materials of teaching and improve, basically also towards teaching and dissemination, because many of us also work in practice. So trying to have those three legs to it, being research the most important, but the other ones also important. So we have a board. This society was founded by Bill Judge, who's here joining us today. And we had a rotation and refreshment of the board. And our current board members is myself. I'm the chair of the board, Alexandra Gregorit, who is here with us. Alexandra, say, wave your hand. Niels Hermes, who I think you all know very well. Lulu Lan, who is online. Gavin Nicholson. So Alexandra is at CBS, Niels is here at Groningen. Lulu Lan is a legal scholar. from NUS. Niels, we consider him our finance accounting person, economics. Alexandra is a strategy. And then Gavin Nicholson is at QUT in Australia. He's an accountant. Jose Luis Rivas, he's at ITAM. He's a management scholar. ITAM is in Mexico City. Eduardo Schiel, he is an accountant as well, and he's in Montreal, HSE. And Wei Shi is a strategy professor. He's at the University of Miami, strategy, and he's also joining us online. And I don't know if Eduardo is joining us online. And then Alessandro is the president. So we try to practice good governance as much as we can. So we have 3 committees. I am the chair of the governance committee. Alessandro is the chair of the membership committee. And the conference committee usually is the person that hosts the conference or is very close to the organizer of the conference. So in this year, it was obviously Niels. And we work a lot at the committee levels on different initiatives. So we tend to have, at least monthly, and then monthly committee meetings, virtual meetings, and then the board meets 4 times a year. And in 2020, Lulu Lan, who's an outstanding corporate law scholar from NUS in Singapore, helped us revise and update our board charter on how we operate. So that was very, very, very good. So I'll turn it to Alessandro now.
Thank you, Ruth. And let me show you some numbers. So as usual, we report some result, the activities that we do for the members. And let me anticipate that they are very encouraging. So the society is on track, is more ambitious, and target to reach some very interesting goal in few years. So the first is a membership. So we overcome 200 this year. That is quite of a great result. I think we can be happy to increase our membership from several countries, so very international, from several disciplines. So is it the spirit of the mission that Ruth clearly explained 1 minute ago? So I think we are on track, but we need to be more ambitious. So when I speak with some of you, I learned that there are a lot of people that want to join, they want to be part of this community, of this society. And I hope next year we can go close to 300. It's a challenge, obviously, but people that are here, maybe they can spread the voice, they can contribute to link other people to the community, and we can do it. So I think this is a great result, and we are all very happy. The board is very active to do this, but I don't think it's a board task, it's a society task. So any member should be involved in this task. If you think you like it and you can contribute to make it also better in terms of scholarship, teaching, and consulting for other people. Then clearly we need to look also at the financials, and there has been a crisis. So, the MEME corporation has been affected. We have been affected very positively. And this is quite important because we are saving money for big task. We have a clear big task in the board, and so we want to reach this goal. This goal will be to own probably a journal. We already have a journal, but we want to be more involved in the academic debate. So we want to contribute to the development of the scholarly community. So we try to do our best also on this side, and this is money of the society that we are preserving, investing, and we are waiting for the big, there is an Italian company, Enel. They were looking for the big fish. At the end, big fish was Endesa, as Spanish people knows. But, you want to have a big goal to reach, and we are waiting for this big goal. This is why we are looking for money. And Annals of Corporate Governance, here there is Mark Geoff, will be probably connected or will meet later on. This is a quite of important objective. This is our journal. So please, all of you, consider to make a proposal to Mark. You can speak, he's here with us. So, or Geoff, you can send an email. And I think we need to cite, we need to build, we need to develop papers for the journal. It's a different format. So it's a long extended paper. Bill Till did one, some of us did one. I think also the board members should be more engaged with the journal. We need to help Mark and Geoff to reach the goal. We want to get, we want to be indexed very soon. We want to be really on the spotlight for everyone in corporate governance. And this is a goal that we can only reach together. So again, this is a community, it's a society, and we need to do together. So the annual conference, I think, well, I cannot say anything that was a fantastic event for me. I hope also for you. And we had big waves, positive waves, negative waves in the last months, as you can imagine. And let me thank especially Ruth and the board for the commitment, the support, because it was not easy. We were always side by side with Niels, Jana, and Swarnodeep. And in June, there was another negative event that was very close to make everything collapse. And but then we stay firm to say, we need to do it. Some of you support because they said, I don't have any interest in a virtual conference. I want to meet my friends, my colleagues. I want to stay together in the same place. And I think this is really something great, a kind of rebirth for all of us to be together, to work together, to present our research, to get comments. And so you see the number. I think we can probably do a big applause and thanks again for Niels and Jana and Swarnodeep.
Yeah, and I think they should come up here, please. Swarnodeep is not here, but please, Jana and Neil. Thank you so much. Take a picture. Okay. Thank you. Don't move, don't leave.
So perfect, like the people that we have the pleasure to have with us today. So really, thank you very much for what you have done.
Yeah. And I think we should not forget Sarah Russell, who is back in every single email, copied in every single email and into everything. So she, like, a big round of applause for her as well. So yeah, we'll do that. So we also have a little, this is Bill Judge idea that we're gonna continue the tradition. So we wanted to honor, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 individuals only here. There are 5 only who have attended the conference at least 5 years. This is our 7th year. So please come up here, Niels again. Jana. So we're gonna give them a little pin of Rafael, Ilaria, and then Alessandro. I'm gonna put you. So they have attended 5 of the 7 conferences. Congratulations, yeah, that makes you a veteran. Yeah.
This one also. Okay. So the fellows. We have been. We always have been involved by fellows. They were a bit inactive until 1 year ago. So we took the possibility to have Bill as a new fellow, and Bill is doing a fantastic job. Just to anticipate what he's doing. So he started to do different things. He prepared the bylaw, he changed with us. He contacted all the fellows to know if they want to be active or inactive. He nominated a few members that joined the fellows. He organized an annual meetings and several meetings. There will be in the future per year. And he designed a webinar series. So I think fellows will be an asset of the society. And I thank Bill for his fantastic job. I remind you the name because they are big name in the corporate governance community. So Bill is a dean, but then we have Geoff Coffey, Jerry Davis, Mara Faccio, Colin Meyer, Randall Mork, Michael Yusim. They are the active members. And the 3 inactive for several reasons. Maybe they have other commitment now, but maybe they can be more active in the future, are Margaret Blair, Amy Hillman, and Jay Lorsch. And so these are an asset. They can contribute also to the journal. They can support the society. And I want to present you in a second something that they were going for us. This will be something that will be very valuable for us. So a few anticipation of what we will do next year and what we did this year. So we will have an annual conference next year in Miami, where we will present you in a minute. So this will be another great event for us. And I hope everybody will consider to come and will put on the agenda, and because I'm sure it will be a fantastic conference like this one. And you can find Boardex data. We change every year the location, so to give you more option. These are firm level data. Some of you are downloading. We are keeping track of the downloads because we want to know if it's useful or not. We have now a social media manager. That is Anna Grossman, is taking care also of this event. Before and after the conference, she's very active. And Shelby Guy will be a manager of the webinar series I will present in a second. Please support, I said before, but I want to reinforce again, our journal. So each of us will consider to approach Mark and Geoff with a proposal that we can develop and make the society stronger, and also you can have a publication we can read and cite. And Till is here with us. There is a clear link between ICGS and corporate governance. Some of us are editor or have been editors. We organize a fantastic PDW. So thanks Till, Costas, and Swarnodeep for the organization. I think this should be a stable asset of the conference. We receive every year 30 papers or more. We give comment and share a lot of time with young scholars that can so improve their paper and eventually reach publication very soon. So this is something that we need to continue. Webinars. We are planning 2 different series of webinars. One will be managed by Bill, will be with the fellows. They will present their overview on some hot topics in corporate governance, while will be handled by Ruth. And we plan to have every 2 months a webinar that will be for all of us. And these are the people that you can look in the next webinar. So as you can see, there are fellows, or there are top scholars or practitioners, because as Ruth said before, we want to try to keep the bridge, to fill the bridge between practice and research and teaching. So I think you cannot miss one of these events. This will be really great. And I really invite you to keep an eye. We will announce on our LinkedIn, or we will send you email. I don't know, Ruth, if you want to comment on this.
Does it work? Yeah. So, the goal here was to combine the fellows, which are, more seasoned scholars, with people that have recently wrote a book on corporate governance. So we'll alternate every 2 months. So we'll start with every 2 months. So we have Randall Mork, but then we have Patricia Lenkov, who has just written this book that's called Time's Up. The third lady on the next to Jerry Davis is a woman that just wrote a wonderful book called Dear Chairman. And then Colin Meyer as a scholar, as a fellow scholar, but then the other 2 in the bottom are Jose Luis Alvarez and Silvia Svejanova at CBS, and they just wrote a book about Oxford University Press book on executive teams. So we want to kind of have it will be very short web, Shelley is going to mostly work on the interviews, but the idea is have 45 minutes, 20 minutes with the speaker, and then 20 minutes of questions. And to do this combination of state of the art that Bill is going to lead with more, just recent books off the press, hot off the press, kind of a book talk. And we thought that would be a nice initiative, and we'll post them on the web as well.
Thank you, Ruth. I think we cannot miss, and we are looking forward to watch the first one. This is one of the key issues that we like and we want to share with you, and please share also with people that are not here at the moment, because this is a key issue. So after the last conference, Natalia Blackburn approached Ruth and I and said, why don't we create a kind of community or micro community? This was an idea that Bill launched years ago through LinkedIn. So we started to give support to Natalia initiative, and we organized 3 meetings. In these 3 meetings, we started to create the idea of the community. So we already have some community. They are nascent community: institutional investor, venture board, board diversity, family business. I think we can design probably 50 communities or 40 communities or 20 communities. So it's plenty of opportunities. The point is, do we want to share ideas with practitioner, scholar that are inside ITGS to provide what? To provide probably new knowledge. And so, for example, one community that's already started is the community in family business in Latin America. They are designing 3-4 output cases, notes about family business in Latin America, board in family in Latin America, and so on. They also approach EVI. And EVI said, well, this is a great initiative, but we are looking not for 3 or 4 products. We want to have 3 or 4 every year for maybe 10 years. So they are looking for a series, not only for some episodic product. So this is an opportunity for ITGS. If we think we want to create community, we can create a series of products that are emphasizing ITGS together with EVI. I think this is a great win-win opportunity for us and EVI. This means that we need to take some volunteer should consider which community you want to create, launch a call for within ITGS community, create the platform, establish maybe a leader that should lead for a period so that we can create meetings, notes, and then all the board members, Ruth and I, will be beside you because we think this could be something quite useful. And Ruth, do you want to add something on this?
No, I mean, this is the case clearinghouse, and they do both teaching notes and technical notes, and it's also distributed through HBS that many of us put the course packs. But what I think is interesting is that it could be shorter cases, and it could also be like, you know, like for instance, in my case, it would be very useful to have it in Spanish or other languages, and have more materials that they are closer to the context where we work, where we do consulting or we do executive teaching or MBA, or so I think that, you know, but yeah, we'll need a critical mass. It's a completely different than the annals, which the annals is more of a monograph. Like if you have a series of papers, then you can put it all together in a 50-page, you know, 70-page longer piece, and that gets distributed to all the members, and some of them are actually very well cited. So a call and a big thanks to both Mark and Jeff on that.
Yeah, so this is an opportunity I think we cannot miss easily. So we need to give a try. And so I hope some of you will consider to create some communities, to bring some people on board and to try to create a kind of potential output you want to develop in the next 3-4 years. And things, this will be the output we will use when we teach. These are the output that we can use for doing different things and activities. And this will be co-owned by the society and EVI. So please consider this. And also, this is one of the initiatives we are thinking to create a community, because in the past we were basically meet together only once per year. Now we want to create webinar series, other events where we can work together, maybe regional conferences. So let's try and share ideas with us, with all the board members, with Ruth and I, because we will be happy to build and to create better value for the member. This is the spirit, and feel free to be engaged and to provide your contribution. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're moving to the fourth point in our annual general meeting of the members of the society, and is the point where we try to practice good governance and do refreshment of the board. We have Till here who used to do this that I'm doing, and now I'm feeling very nervous because he's German and he was very good at running these meetings, but I'll try to do my best. So we are gonna run the elections of the new board members, but let me tell you a little bit how this works. So we have one incumbent ICGS director, director that expires now. Her term of the term of Lulu Lan expires now, and she is available and running to have another term. The terms are 3 years. We are also very interested in not only refreshment, but also succession of the board, because some of us will step out in 2 years, 3 years. So we need to plan the succession. We don't want these, 5 people to leave and 5 new people. So we want both refreshment of the board as well as succession. This is why at the moment we're going to fill up 4 director positions, including the renewal. And the way we run this is we solicit, there's an email that went out on July 10th. We solicit to all our active members, the ones that they are registered, all our active members to nominate directors. And then that solicitation was closed by August 20th, 21. And we did not have any additional nominations, okay? So then the board, especially within the governance and nomination committee, decided we did kind of an assessment of our board in terms of the skill set that we needed and who was stepping down, who was coming. We're very interested in, and I'll start in this order, disciplinary diversity, so people who come from different backgrounds, regional diversity, obviously also gender diversity, and also different points of view. We don't want the friends of Alessandro, right? Like we want like people that don't even know each other. Like we want different points of view and people who, and also people who have, people who have, so in the next one, people who, these are kind of the selection criteria, no? Like why would any of you, and we very much hope that you start nominating yourself as well in the future. But we need people who are number one members, who have the time to do this, who have contributed to corporate governance, who have some experience in leadership and have shown that they can commit to the organization, not just have the title. And because there is a lot of work to be done, we're trying to build a lot of things. And these are kind of the requirements here, right? You have to be an active member, you have to, so we do a due diligence in the board members that we propose, because they go through the nominations committee in the board that I'm the chair. So in this election cycle, we have 4 people running for the 4 positions. And you will get an email in 2 weeks where you'll have to vote. Today is the email goes out today after this meeting, and you'll have like a window of 2 weeks to vote. And it's important that you please vote, because otherwise, so we have a nice quorum as well. So we will go in so I have asked the 4 directors that they're running for election to say a few words, very few words. And so we'll start with Lulu, who I think is online. So I don't know how we changed to online. Oh, here.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. So Lulu's joining us from Singapore, and I don't think it's sunny there at the moment.
No. Yes. Thanks, Ruth, and thanks everyone. Sorry I couldn't be with you guys, but it's lovely to see that the conference is going well. I wish I was there. But yes, I'm calling from Singapore. It's not as bad as Korea, which Sung will actually speak as. In Singapore now, it's about almost 9 in the evening. But I'm happy to see everyone and see Alessandra and Ruth. So a little bit about myself. Yes, I joined ICGS board in 2018. So I've just finished 1 term of 3 years, and I'm seeking re-election for another term. Of course, for good corporate governance, we always say we will try to stay for at least 2 terms, and the 3rd term is actually optional. But 2 terms, you will see how the things that you have actually contributed is doing. Right. So for the 3 years that I've been involved in the board was to put in place rules and like what you see, the board charter, some of the election process. I was quite involved in that. And again, like what Alessandra was saying, that for the new activities, I think it is. Sometimes ideas are good, and at the same time we also need to put in things. When certain things happen, what should we do? So I'm that person. So I'm actually the secretary of the board. I try to help the board in some of the legal issues, and that's my forte. All right. And of course, again, because of my research, I'm a legal scholar. I also hope to increase the prominence of legal scholars in corporate governance, especially in ICGS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lulu. Thank you. Great to see you online. So now we have Mark Gorgon in the room. So if you could say a few words. Let me give you the microphone. just your background and yeah.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Marc Gerger, and I'm based at IE Business School in Spain, Madrid. And I think Ruth and Alessandro have mentioned a few times that I'm one of the editors of Annals of Corporate Governance. So if you haven't heard it as yet, I'm just repeating it to be sure. So I think similar to what Alessandro and Ruth said, we're always looking for papers. And I think we've got some members that are more active than others, but it's a society journal. So, you know, think about this journal as an output for your own research. And published widely on corporate governance, so that's no surprise, I guess. That's why I would be really happy to join this society. And I would love to even drive this society further and make it an even better society. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Mark is a finance professor at Instituto de Empresa in Madrid. Yeah. Now we are gonna turn to, I think Sun Yuan is online as well.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth, Alexandro. Hi, everyone. My name is Sun Hyun Park. People just call me Sun. I'm currently serving as a professor of strategy at Seoul National University Business School. Thank you very much for the invitation to join the community. And I'm honored to join and wish to serve the community. I've been doing research on time management team board, and especially their interactions with the financial community, such as financial analysts. And after I came back to South Korea, I got very much interested in the local specialties of corporate governance and things like gender diversity and their presentation at the board level, which is an important institutional agenda here. Okay, well, due to the COVID-19 travel restrictions, I was not able to attend the annual conference this year. I hope I can meet you all sometime soon in person. And I think that's all from my side. Have a wonderful conference in Groningen. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, San. Thanks a lot. And yeah, last but not least, Margaret.
Hi, I'm Marguerite Wiersma from the University of California in Irvine. I think I'm the only person from the US here, okay, that traveled from the US. Oh, you traveled as well, Bill. Anyway, it's a pleasure and thank you for inviting me to join the board. My research journey started with very much executives and looking at executive teams. And obviously the board determines who the executives are. So I've always kind of been involved in the governance issue in corporations. And I started at the Strategic Management Society, the Leadership and Governance IG, which allowed us to break away from the sort of main track of strategy, and have been very involved in SMS throughout my career in trying to identify appropriate research tracks. But my own research interests are very strongly sort of in the finance strategies intersection. And it has to do with the fact I have an MBA in corporate finance and worked in industry and finance, but then came to the bright side of management and strategy. And so I've always thought that this particular research is far more phenomena specific and far more interdisciplinary than most of the research topics that people study in management. And it really needs that kind of soil, an interdisciplinary soil, to be fruitful. And I find that in management, we're too much in an ivory tower and we're not interacting with practitioners, we're not interacting with scholars outside of management. As an AE at SMJ, I reviewed way too many papers that didn't cite a single finance scholar, even though finance people have published more on things like executive succession and executive compensation than any management field has. So I'd really like to encourage that interdisciplinary basis for the ICGS. I think that's what makes this society unique, is that we are not a management organization, we're an academic organization devoted to a topic called corporate governance. And I think there's a lot of bright future to be had in having that interdisciplinary foundation to the society. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to thank the four scholars, Lulu, Mark, San, and Margaret, for willing to give their time and efforts and resources to ICGS, and we're willing to run for this election. So a big applause to everybody. So we also, Alessandro and I also want to take this moment to thank our three people who, one is not here, but the other two are here wearing blue next to each other. So we want to thank very much Teal for being the former director of, you have to come here, we have a little thing for you. Being an outstanding director, and we had some choppy waters at times, and he was very calm and German and very organized, and looking at the book, at the bylaws, and like what we needed to do next. So, and keeping everything. So thank you. He's an amazing scholar and organizer, and very incredible person, most of anything else. So. Thanks you so much, and we have a nice little thing for you, and thank you. And then we would like Bill to come up here, please, as our founding member, scholar of the society, and now he has agreed. He wants to do many other things, fun things like sailing and other things, but we're not letting him go yet. We thought it would be super important to utilize his convincing, persuasive capabilities and his network, and that he could lead these International Corporate Governance Society fellows. That he would be the president and launch that parallel, organization within ICGS of the fellows. So thank you so much for reining in these scholars, and we'll have more in the future, but organizing and getting it launched, and then hopefully we'll let you go and have your hobbies and everything. But for now, so thank you so much for being founding the society and still helping us so much. So thanks.
And there was a third one that is not now with us. They were the three members in the beginning. So T was the chair, B was the president, and there was Steen Thompson that is not currently here, but he was also a board member since the beginning. He received the same gift, and let's make a big applause. Maybe he will be connected. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so now we need to look about the future, and there should be way connected with us from Miami. Why are you here?
Yes. Do you see the slides?
The floor is yours now.
Does everybody have the coats hanging downstairs? Do you all have your coats hanging?
Wait, let us imagine how could be the 13th or 14th of November next year for all of us. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ruth and Alessandro. Good afternoon, everyone in Groningen. My name is Wei Shi, and I'm Associate Professor of Management at Miami Herbert Business School, University of Miami. As all of you probably have already know, the 8th ICGS annual conference will be held by University of Miami in 2022. The conference will be co-chaired by Fabrizio Ferri, a professor of accounting at the University of Miami, and myself. I would like to take this opportunity to first thank the ICGS and board of directors for the trust they place in us to organize the conference. And I also would like to thank Niels Hermes and his colleagues for sharing their valuable experiences, insights for organizing this year's conference. Although I couldn't attend this year's conference due to some unforeseen reasons, I have already know that the conference has been so far a huge success. Congratulations. I believe that some of you may have been in Miami, but for those who never been in Miami, I would like to give you a brief virtual tour. I have a lot to brag about Miami, but I don't have time. Miami is one of the iconic American cities. It has been ranked #1 most international city in the United States. Some may debate the ranking. Well, we will take it. Top 5 most livable cities in the world and one of the happiest place to work in the US. Largest concentration of international banks in the US. In 2021, Forbes ranked Miami as #1 emerging tech cities. In the last few years, I have personally seen a lot of high-tech companies moving from California to Florida, mostly to the city of Miami. So University of Miami, the flagship research university in the city of Miami, we have about roughly 17,000 students from all over the globe. And Miami Herbert Business School, one of the 11 schools and colleges serving both undergrad and graduate students. The business school is located on a lush campus with a very beautiful lake. Over the last few years, we have seen significant improvements in terms of ranking. Our full-time MBA program ranked number 46 by Bloomberg, and the Master of Business Analytics program ranked number 33rd in the world. So the 8th annual ICG annual conference, the theme is corporate governance in the digital era, challenges, opportunities. So as you probably already know, that the conference will be held between November 12th and November 13th, 2022. So we have seen the development of digital technology has significantly changed the business landscape in the last decade, and the growing power of platform companies like Facebook, Google, and the critical role of data to business successes, and also adoption of AI technology in many fields. So we believe that digital transformation brought challenges to existing governance practices. So in terms of challenges, and board directors need to ensure that data are safe and companies will not become target of cybersecurity attacks. Stakeholders these days, they also find it easier to get mobilized and engage in collective action with the help of social media platform. And in the past, corporate governance research has so far focused on institutional investors, but let's take a look at what happened last year for AMC and the GameStop or saga. The retail investors, they basically coordinate their trading strategy and can have profound influences on managerial decisions. And this year, AMC issued new stocks specifically focused on retail investors. So we believe that these new challenges brought by digital transformation in the business practice present both challenges and opportunities. And this calls for governance scholars to better understand how companies can navigate the challenges and opportunities brought by digitalization of business. So in terms of tracks, we will have 6 tracks for next year's conference. And so for sure, we have corporate governance in the digital era track. We also have board track, ownership track, external governance track, and internal governance track. And lastly, comparative corporate governance, given that we're a very international society. If you're interested in serving as track chair of any of these tracks, please do not hesitate to send me an email. So some important dates, if you would like to submit your proposals or papers to the conference. So the submission will open on March 1st, 2022, and close on June 1st, 2022. And the submissions will be conducted through ICGS conference website. And more details will be announced through various social media channels. And lastly, I would like to thank all of you for your interest and in next year's conference, and my co-chair Fabrizio Alfieri and myself, and we look forward to welcoming you to University of Miami beautiful campus next year. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a great opportunity for all of us next year, and it will be an amazing experience for all of us, I'm sure. So now
Thanks so much, Wei.
Thank you very much, Wei. Any question? I think this is a possibility that you have to either to make question or to make statement launch a new project, we will be very
Yeah,
happy to get your opinion.
suggestions, anything that anybody wants to share? Until the next session. Yes, one question, Nestor.
I identify this kind of possibilities is very attractive to see that. How is the or was the experience in previous years according to this society to the connection with Latin America? Because for my case, I am interested. I came from a school of business in Peru that has connection with other school of business like INCAE or Tecnológico Monterrey or Adolfo Ibáñez and so on. And my interest is to expand it, these kind of things. And well, if we have the opportunity to see another kind of connection on other scholars that was presented or was a far part of the fellow in this society, I was very interested for that.
Yeah. So the goal of the micro communities is that, you know, if we are 100, 200 members, it's hard to work with everybody. And we have like this matrix, kind of matrix interest, like you might be like compensation or family business and then Latin America. So, I mean, I think especially in the case of Latin America, especially next year being in Miami, it would be nice if you and, you know, maybe with Jose Luis from the board, and then some other people here that work on Latin America, Luis Ricardo, Rafael, you know, we have a lot of people that you could start that conversation and then kind of culminate, you know, maybe with a panel, talk to Wei, you know, things are in the making. So talk to Wei and have a panel on, you know, corporate governance in Latin America, but not that title, but something, you know, something a little bit more, you know, kind of deeper. But so this is the spirit of that, you know, that to have communities, but they could be functional communities, but it could also be like a community of assistant professors that they want to share best practices and, you know, like share their work. But not just once a year, but more in a regular basis, like create these micro communities within the society. Yeah.
Yes, I think we have a platform of people who have a passion on corporate governance. And there may be smaller interest within corporate governance or more specific interest, and we can do something together probably. And we can exchange views, syllabus, we can write together research note. You can send me your case that I will use in my class and so on. So it's a platform that we can use for several purposes. And so you are invited to be active and engage and try to connect with somebody or launch something that we can do. So for example, now Ruth is saying something that we are still thinking, maybe how to support PhD or young scholar. We can create also, you know, 1 monthly or bi-monthly paper presentation. So in my department, I introduce breakfast seminar. So every month we need to have a couple of people presenting shortly a paper, we give comments. So it's plenty of ideas. We need to have ideas, but we need to have also people managing ideas. So it cannot be only us, it can be everybody that can contribute with a piece of his commitment to the society.
Other questions? No?
If there are not, you can always send us an email to all the board members, Ruth and I, and we need to really be engaged and to create something, because now we are so many that we can have an impact outside, we can have an impact on teaching, on research, on practice. So feel free to connect to everybody, and any idea, anything that can improve your commitment or the value you receive from ICGS for us is a commitment. So please let us know and we will do our best to make it real.
Yeah, maybe another thing that we didn't share is that we have some, you know, in the past we had some funding from different institutions, including Wiley, but also from the World Bank, and then some foundations. So, because the goal is that our goal is to also be inclusive, and especially with doctoral students and scholars from emerging markets. So we have, you know, we will continue. We have a committee within the board, but, you know, we are going to reach out. We will continue to look for funding to sponsor these scholars that it's not so easy for them to access, because we want to learn from them. We want to, both, it's both ways. It's a win-win.
Yes, we are thinking also other alternative. For example, we are talking a lot about institutional membership. So to have some research center or to have some companies even in corporate governance, they want to be linked with us. They want to send people to our conference, exchange practices. This could be something very good for us. They have data. They maybe want to know what came out from their data, and we can work together. Another option we are exploring is about regional representative. So maybe people that can better connect some scholar in some regions, could be in Americas or North America, South America, Europe. So feel free to tell us what you think could be the best for the society, and feel free to tell us, I want to do something for, and this could be something that can give value to the society. The board is very horizontal, open to everybody. So really, I think there is a good spirit, a good commitment from everyone, and the society can only reach the next level if everyone is a bit more engaged. This is my suggestion and my feeling.
All right, so we still have a lot of conference left. We have a great panel now. What time does it start? Like at 5:50? Yeah, in 3:15, no? So we have the people trickling in. So let's stretch our legs and don't go too far, because it's about to start. And then we have another session, and then we have the closing reception. So the conference is not over. There's a lot more.
Thank you, Lily. Bye now. Yeah. Thank you, Wei. I'll see you next year.
See you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Is the micro working? Yeah. So welcome to the last plenary session of this conference. It is a very topical theme for this last plenary session, that is investors are ownership in times of disruption. And that is a very topical theme. We really live in times of disruptions. The corona pandemic has prompted businesses to make significant permanent changes to how they do business, implementing greater use of remote working, reduction in office space, accelerating the digital transformation, a greater use of automation, responding to changing consumer patterns and preferences, a redesign of the supply chain, and accelerating decision-making and change are just a few of the COVID-19 lessons. Boards feel in particular the need to implement change faster and the need to make decisions faster. And at the same time, the corona pandemic also raised awareness for sustainability topics, in particular the impact of climate change, but also biodiversity loss, economic inequality, and precarious work. Companies are increasingly integrating sustainability into their strategy and policies and are expected to deliver net zero transition plans. CEOs feel that they are required to deliver strong financial results and to make significant social and environmental contribution. What is the impact of all these trends on investors in companies? How are investors responding to these developments? Are investors also driving the board's agenda by setting their own agenda? And are they really a force for good for changing companies' focus on long-term value creation instead of only focusing on shareholder value and financial metrics? And if so, how are they doing that? Did the corona pandemic change investors' behavior? These are just a few questions that will be addressed by our distinguished panel. And I begin with Farida. Farida is leading the active ownership responsibilities within NN Investment Partner, the Dutch asset manager. She has a focus on corporate governance and social related topics. NN Investment Partners manages assets for investors worldwide, and I thought you have almost 300 billion assets under management, so a big Dutch asset manager. Before joining NNIP in March 2019, Farida worked for Sustainalytics, where she was managing the corporate governance research team. Prior to Sustainalytics, she worked for the Dutch asset manager MN with the responsible investment team, and for proxy advisor ISS, where she was leading the Benelux research team. Then we have Cynthia Williams. Cynthia is professor at the Osgoode Hall Law School, I thought, in Canada, the York University. But she also holds a part-time position as professor of US corporate and securities law at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam here in the Netherlands. She writes in the areas of securities law, corporate responsibility, comparative corporate governance, and regulatory theory. And last not least, we have Margriet Wiersema. She already introduced herself a couple of moments ago. She holds the Dean's Professorship in Strategic Management at the Paul Merritt School of Business at the University of California in Irvine, California. And her research interests are focused on corporate strategy and corporate governance. Her research examines how capital market constituents such as financial analysts and active hedge funds influence boards and executive decision-making. And her research on boards also examines the influence of gender diversity. So welcome to this distinguished panel. So we start with what are the new goals and objectives after COVID-19? And I would like to kick off with Farida, as she is practitioner within the institutional investor community. What are NN Investors Partners' new objectives after the corona pandemic? Did COVID-19 change your investment style, your investment portfolio, and your engagement program with the investee companies? And if so, how did it change? So, Farida, the floor is yours.
Yep, thank you, Rins. And thank you all for inviting me to speak here today. So NN Investment Partners is, as Rins mentioned, a Dutch investment manager. We are actually the third-party asset manager of Nationale-Nederlanden for the Dutch speakers here, a large insurance firm. And I think we started basically responsible investment a long time ago, and we focused mostly on corporate governance. The focus was, of course, on proxy voting and sort of talking about compensation. In the Netherlands, there was always a lot of focus on compensation plans. If you open the newspapers, it still is actually. But over the years, that sort of changed. Other topics came up the surface. So it was not just a corporate governance focus, but you saw also social topics occurring, especially labor topics. So how are companies dealing with their labor force, but also their supply chain, because that's a huge part of some of the corporations that we focus on nowadays. What has happened over the past few years is that actually shifted to climate change. And I think it's that COVID hasn't sort of triggered climate change to be now the leading topic and as focus for investors. It actually started already a couple of years ago. But what it did change is that the whole COVID pandemic actually showed companies that there were more issues to focus on. And then it was no longer just a focus on shareholder return, but that actually a pandemic can disturb everything. It can disturb how you deal with your workforce. A lot of companies had to lay off people. Some companies actually got government bailouts. So you saw that actually the focus started changing a bit from companies itself, but also the boards that we spoke to. It also changed our perspective a bit. So we now start looking into other topics as well. So after during the COVID pandemic, but also still now, we still have conversations with companies about especially layoffs and how they are helping people within their workforce to look for another position. But also how they deal with transitions. Because especially with the climate transition that is going on right now, you see that also companies and boards need to basically, sort of start acting in that matter as well. For instance, an oil and gas company that's drilling oil out of the ground probably has to train and recruit a new type of people that work on windmills or solar panels. So it's also sort of restructuring the workforce and making sure that people are educated in a different way. So these type of topics are now quite leading, and I think the COVID pandemic definitely showed that this was an important topic to address. As Rins already mentioned, biodiversity is actually a topic that has now come up the surface as well. I don't think the COVID pandemic basically triggered it, but it's just a topic that sort of raised up the surface as well. Biodiversity, and it's mostly focused on deforestation. A lot of the agricultural commodities that we actually eat and consume on a daily basis are linked to a massive scale of deforestation in Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, but also Africa. So there's a lot of things that we have to focus on. Water is also a topic that we actually emphasize more. A lot of companies that we are invested in consume a lot of water in their production process. So we also want to make sure that companies are still equipped to basically sell beer in the future. Because, let's be honest, if Heineken, who basically produces beer and actually gets most of its ingredients from, let's say, Africa, and there's a lot of water scarcity in those regions, what will happen in the future? Will Heineken still be able to produce these commodities, to produce their key product? So there's really a lot of different topics that we try to address nowadays, and that changed the focus a bit.
Do they actually get their water from Africa?
No, but they use water for the production process and also to make sure that they can grow the crops. Yeah.
Didn't want to think they were that irrational.
No. They fly it in by airplane, right? Yeah.
The growing emphasis on E, S, and G, was that triggered by yeah, the risks for the financial returns, or was it also triggered by legislation or your own clients? What was the real trigger for more focus on ESG?
I think both. I think there was definitely a shift in legislation, and you see that, for instance, for us nowadays, SFDR is really an important legislation. So you see that that has shifted a lot, and we're focusing also a lot on making sure that we are equipped to deal with that in the future. Because of SFDR, we have to focus on like how our funds are performing, but also how we integrate sustainability into our investment process. So there's a lot more emphasis on that as well. But a lot of clients are also focusing on it. If we look at pension funds in the Netherlands, and it's also due to legislation, but also a shift in society, and also seeing that these topics are quite important, you know, they also ask and basically demand from us that we focus on sustainability issues as well. And then the last part is, of course, we're also a big player in the Netherlands. We also believe that we have an important influence in society. We actually, you know, insurance is our main business. So, you know, a lot of risks that our clients are facing are also a risk to us. If a lot of businesses are facing risks in terms of climate change, because, yeah, water is now a huge risk in the Netherlands as well. We saw, you know, a lot of droughts and suffering in Limburg a few months ago. So that is a risk to us as well as a business. And we have to focus on that as well. Our role in society is also making sure that the risks our clients are facing, but also society as a whole, we have to address into our assets as well.
Thanks. Then turning to the US, is the same movement going on in institutional investors seated in the United States? Is there also growing pressure coming from society, from legislation, from clients of US asset managers? Can you tell a little bit more on
yes,
from the US
yes,
perspective?
And yes. Well, if you believe Larry Fink from BlackRock, his clients, their client, you know, they have $9 trillion under management, and his public statements are that they are hearing from their clients that they understand sustainability as an important issue. And there's an economic logic to it as well. In passive investing, what, you know, passive widely diversified investing is meant to do is to get rid of the risks, the financial risks from individual companies, and be left only with whatever, you know, non-diversifiable risk that comes from the markets that you're in, the beta. Well, some of these risks, all of these risks, are particularly non-diversifiable, right? Climate risk is non-diversifiable. Biodiversity loss is probably non-diversifiable. Economic inequality might be diversifiable, but then those investors need to care about the health of the underlying economy, and the health of the underlying economy is increasingly understood to be affected by these large systemic changes. Now, what is the evidence that large investors see this and understand it? We can see it in the voting data from 2021. Morningstar, which is an organization that tracks this data, said that it saw this year average support for shareholder proposals on environmental, social, and governance issues go up on average to 34%, which is really very high for shareholder proposals, and 36 of them in general received majority support. 26 climate-related proposals received majority support. The 26 climate-related proposals had average support of 51%. 14 of those majority support. And then we also know that some, and I think that Margarita is going to talk about some of this, that the board elections at ExxonMobil, 3 new board members were elected. They were part of Engine Number 1, a small hedge fund in the UK that was, in its public statements, emphasizing climate, also emphasizing, the financial problems they saw at Exxon. But 3 out of 4 of those board members were elected, and analyses suggested it's because BlackRock and State Street, but BlackRock in particular, changed their voting in 2021. And that's one of the reasons we see these shifts. So, thank you.
Margaret, you're an expert in hedge funds activism. Do you see also a change in focus amongst hedge funds? Are they now really focused on ESG-related issues? By the example was already named by Cynthia, Engine number 1, that proposed specific nominees for the board of ExxonMobil. Or are they still focused on short-term financial results?
Well, I'd like to be more optimistic, but I don't think that engine number 1 represents the average activist hedge fund. And even engine number 1, their entire campaign was focused on the underperformance of Exxon, not on ESG issues. Their concern over ESG was that the company would perform even worse with the climate change issues that were being presented. So it was very much a performance-driven campaign, and the board candidates that they put forth, they attacked the board and called it incompetent because it lacked industry expertise. And so the board candidates they put forth were actually candidates with very heavy oil industry backgrounds. So yes, it was painted in the media as an ESG campaign, but in reality it was very much like a typical activist investor campaign targeting a company whose performance was below its peers. Now, what I'd like to draw attention to is that activist investors have had huge impact on the institutional investors in general. Activist investors are institutional investors as well, but they've had a huge impact on the overall shareholders of companies. And I wanted to just draw some points out as to how I think that they've impacted other investors and how that, of course, then impacts companies and boards. If you think about this whole debate we're having in society about the purpose of a corporation between shareholders versus stakeholders, this is not a new debate. It's not something that came out of COVID. It's been around forever. And companies used to be not very shareholder friendly. 1980s resulted in the market for corporate control to address that. Companies were built, they were empire-laden, very hierarchical, and the only concern was building a bigger and bigger company so that the executives could get more and more compensation, because compensation was a function of the size of the organization. And shareholders, starting with pension funds like CalPERS, the largest pension fund in the world, started to rattle the cages of companies, but they had very little influence, because of the fact they have to hold a diversified portfolio. So the market for corporate control started with activist investors, more in the form of what we call boutiques. The leveraged buyout phenomenon of the 1980s is where that started. And they started to buy up these very diversified large corporations like RJR Nabisco, Beatrice Foods, to name a few, and then to dismantle the empires that had been built by management. And that was the start of the shareholder revolution and the shareholder focus in companies. And it started in the United States. And I remember the front page headline of the Paris main newspaper, which now I draw a blank on. What's the Paris newspaper? Le Monde. The front page of the newspaper was that the pension funds will not come to France. Several weeks later, they did, okay? So there's always been this sort of myopia in Europe that whatever happens in US will stay in the US, but capital markets are global. And if you're dependent on the capital markets, you're going to be subjected to whatever trend occurs in those capital markets. So needless to say, the pension funds driven, as well as the activist investors of the 1980s, really put the focus on shareholder wealth, and the compensation system in organizations changed radically. I worked at General Motors, and the CEO of General Motors was the second largest company in the world at the time, 1970s, and the CEO of the company made $1.5 million. That is pittance compared to what CEOs make today. Now, I have to tell you, the CEO of Toyota still makes about $1.5 million. But in the US, and I think even in Europe, those salaries have long been not seen. But what happened is compensation shifted from salary and bonus based on operating profit to 90% executive compensation based on stock option pay. And that is what's drawn these very, very large salaries, because as you've all experienced, the stock market has done very well over the period of time since the 1980s, and especially in the last year. So we're going to see a year, like 2021, that will look incredibly productive and profitable for investors. We've never seen such a boom set of years, and it's a global market. We're going to have globally, mergers and acquisitions will be at an all-time high. We'll set a new record. We'll pass the previous record of 2007. Executive compensation will be at an all-time high, surpassing any prior compensation levels. And yet we're in this world of turmoil, okay? So if you think that shareholder permanence has disappeared, I would say look at the data. So getting back to my comment about how activist investors have impacted other investors, which is the sort of focus of my research, is the activist investors of today, which are the hedge funds. The way that they have impacted, and I think it's actually a trend that has a long run impact that will be very, very favorable, is that the institutional investors, because of the nature of having to hold a diversified portfolio, have very little clout. As Cynthia mentioned, even social activism campaigns can't seem to get traction. And a lot of the social activism campaigns are backed by pension funds. So the Norwegian All Fund, for instance, is a big backer of a lot of these social activism initiatives that come to shareholders. And yet they've never really historically had much traction. And that's why they always revert to tactics like consumer boycotts and things like that to try to get traction with the investors and with the company. Whereas activists have had a lot of traction. You know, there's not a day that goes by that the FT doesn't have at least one article where activist investors are impacting a major company, whether it be in Europe or the US or in Asia. So activist investors do have the ear of other investors, and they do have the ear of the board and management. And in fact, activist investors have put the board in the hot seat. And what the impact of that is that the activist investor can't act alone because they only hold a small stake. So they have to convince the other institutional investors that what they're urging has some legitimacy, has some validity to it. And by doing that, they're waking up the other investors. What's happened in the institutional investor community is that the majority of equity is no longer actively managed. The index funds, for instance, own a considerable portion of the equity market. The big three have 35% in the US alone. And as a result, they're passive investors. They don't actively manage their portfolio, and they don't tend to be activists. Whereas the activist investors work with these other institutional investors and get them to take on and support their campaign. Because without these other institutional investors, the activists can't have any traction with the board or with management. So what have they done? The big thing, I think, that is the positive thing from an ESG and environmental issue and social issue standpoint is that by waking up these other institutional investors and getting the other institutional investors support for their campaigns, they've engaged in what I would call a renewed communication of investors with the board and with management. In the old days, the investor relations department of a company was a very low, let's say on an organizational level, a very low place to work. It was the department that issued the annual report. It served, other than that, almost no function. Today, companies have to communicate with their investors. And if they don't, I can tell you what they are in American, they're screwed, okay? You have to communicate with your investors. So this is something that has totally changed in the last 10 years, is that the activists have brought to light to companies and boards that you can no longer ignore your investors. And those are the institutional investors, by the way. So in a sense, it's opened up a two-way street where they now seek out how institutional investors, what their issues are, what their concerns are, and a dialogue has started that is long way overdue between corporations and boards and the institutional investors. And I think it's that dialogue that is the positive that has come out of activist investor campaigns, because there was no dialogue before. So even very large active institutional investors, like in the United States, TIAA-CREF. I talked to the managers at TIAA-CREF 15 years ago when Say on Pay became a really hot issue. And they're very, very strong on Say on Pay. They're the ones that got the SEC to actually push the dial on this in the US. But despite that, they've had very little traction. If you look at the shareholder votes on Say on Pay, they've basically failed. So now we have companies and boards that are actually having a dialogue with the big institutional investors. And so the concerns that institutional investors put forth are going to have a lot more traction given that environment.
Cynthia, are you agreeing with that?
Well, yeah, I agree with it, but I don't know why we would call that a favorable development. I mean, if it is true to describe the world as the stock market doing very well, which it is, mergers and acquisitions at an all-time high, which they are, executive compensation is through the roof because of stock option compensation. And what we have done is, of course, align management's interests with those of the shareholders, but it doesn't seem to me that it's creating a world that is actually one that is going in the right direction. If we, we've passed the limits of the environmental limits that Johan Rockström's organization, the Potsdam Institute in Stockholm, have identified for climate change, for phosphorus exchange, and for, I think, biodiversity loss. We have and have had since the 80s growing economic inequality. It's not going, and job precarity. So, yes, I mean, I totally agree that your description of the world is actually, it's an accurate description. Every time I give an introduction to corporate social responsibility, I talk about, the voting trends and all the good things that are happening, and I say, but wait a minute, we do have these activists that are putting high-powered pressure on companies to maximize shareholder value. So I still think there's a missing piece.
In that respect, what do you think about Jaap Winter's proposal that there should be a duty of societal responsibility be imposed on the boards of corporations? Would that be one of the solutions for both of you? Cynthia, go ahead.
Well, I'm happy to give my view. At least in the United States and also in Canada and Australia and the UK, it is the fiduciary obligations of board members are an open textured norm. And the fiduciary obligations in the United States and anywhere of the board is to incorporate into their strategies and their oversights any financially material risk that can be understood and quantified and evaluated. And possibly they'll have disclosure obligations as well. So I'm part of something called the Commonwealth Climate and Law Initiative, started at Oxford University, and we're looking at boards' obligations and certainly think that incorporating these data is part of their responsibility. It doesn't say anything about what the outcome of that incorporation is. We can't yet say you have a fiduciary obligation to align your strategy with Paris. That would have to come, and that is coming in bits and pieces from some shareholders and from civil society.
Margaret,
so, avoiding the question, I have a lot of ideas about Jaap Winter. I would love to see Jaap Winter's duty to society instantiated, but I don't see that we're there yet.
You're pessimistic that it will happen in the US. But in 2019, I thought that there was a manifest amongst US companies regarding stakeholder capitalism. What do you think about
I
that,
think
Margaret?
That's a lot of greenwashing. You know, I don't really think anything happened as a result of that manifest from the CEO roundtable, which you're referring to. But to get back to, so Cynthia's a legal scholar, and even she was hesitant to claim that boards have a duty beyond shareholders, right? She didn't really state, she said it's fungible, is what I think.
It's a duty to the corporation and its shareholders, and in the United States, I strongly argue if there's a conflict, it's a duty to the corporation. And,
okay.
And that very often doing what's good for the corporation today is, as you know, was said in today's keynote, very often must incorporate some of this in order to do a good job for the corporation.
But the courts in the US are the ones that ultimately determine the outcome. And when directors are sued, they are generally not sued because they lack moral responsibility. They are generally sued because they lack financial oversight. And so, you know, until the courts rule that there is an obligation that goes beyond the shareholder oversight, and management oversight, management monitoring, I mean, if you look at the cases, they're all about financial. They're all about not making the right decisions at the board level, and as a result, having a negative impact on shareholders. And shareholders are the ones that bring forth these suits. So the courts ultimately have to see that there's a sufficient evidence for that case to go forward, and those cases that go forward tend to be based on financial matters. But getting back to Cynthia's argument that she doesn't think it's as positive, well, when you've had almost no dialogue with your institutional investors, I think opening up the dialogue is a step in the right direction. And the other thing is the institutional investors have wanted to have this dialogue. That's, I think, the thing. The institutional investors have for a long time wanted to influence the corporations they invest in a more significant way, and they can't. Right? Because they have a diversified portfolio, they have very little say. What comes to shareholders to vote on is pretty much perfunction. It's not perfunctory. It's not anything that they really can have a big impact on when it comes to what's at the shareholders meeting vote. So this is a way to start that dialogue, and I think it will have a huge impact in how corporations view their investors. And the other thing I'll add is that a lot of the institutional investors are very concerned about issues like ESG, environmental, social issues. They're very concerned about governance issues. Activist investors, as I mentioned earlier, have put boards on the hot seat. So what have investors done? Investors are now calling for board terms, which in the US are non-existent. And I tell you, that is a big problem in the US. We have too many stale, pale boards in the US. And the companies that get into, and male, I should add, yes. And the companies that get into trouble inevitably look like an old men's club. You know, average tenure of 12 years at Wells Fargo, who was inducted, you know, a scandal. GE had a very prominent board of who's who, but none of them did anything. So it's sort of this club of prestigious individuals with titles, but not doing anything, what we would call responsible monitoring of management.
If there are any questions from the audience, please raise your hand, and then we can bring it forward to this panel. There is a question. Oh, there.
Yeah,
Also, sorry. You're the second one. Yep.
Hi, Rineke Slager from University of Groningen. I had a question also for Farida and maybe Rins as well. So the title of the panel is Ownership. I know that in many countries, particularly in the Netherlands, when we talk about these dialogues between institutional investors and companies, it's often the asset manager doing that and on behalf of the asset owner, but perhaps not always with very good feedback loops in terms of knowledge and information. So I wonder where you see that kind of division of responsibilities in practice, maybe also in terms of legislation. And I guess linked to that, you talked a bit about integration, so it's important to have dialogue, but there's other instruments by which we can put pressure on companies, so voting, integration, impact investment. And do you see a lot of that integration in terms of instruments developing in practice?
Farida.
Yeah, well, good questions. I think let me start with the second question actually. So in terms of ESG integration, I think this is the key component nowadays, right? Because you can vote in a certain way, you can engage on a certain matter, you can engage on sustainability, but if you don't integrate it into your own assets, nothing will change. Because in the end, we are still buying basically anything on the stock market or anything on the bond market. So I think that's where we have to start, right? So that means you have to integrate sustainability into your assets. And it's not just buying green bonds from companies or from sovereigns. It also means integrating it into your emerging market credit loan portfolio and integrating it in your US credit portfolio. And that basically means you have to look at sustainability data, you have to look at how the company is performing, how the board is performing. So it's all kinds of things that we're looking into nowadays. We look at, for instance, the climate emissions of the entire portfolios, and we look how much companies are emitting. If companies are above a certain threshold, we will definitely exclude them already from the investing perspective. We look at water and waste data nowadays. We look at human rights and labor rights factors, and we look how companies are performing. We also look at controversies. So if companies have been involved in a lot of controversies, let's say pollution or labor rights violations, we will exclude them from the portfolio as well. So there's already a fine line where you can start, because basically engagement and proxy voting is actually a reactive approach. It's not a proactive approach. ESG integration is the proactive approach that you can actually do. In terms of your first question, I think my position is a bit easy. Our main client is Nationale Nederlanden, which actually represents about 70% of our assets, so that's a huge chunk. Then we have one big bank in the Netherlands that a lot of you will well know, is also a big client, and then we have some smaller pension funds. What we do is basically we make sure that those pension funds, because it's actually, especially for those pension funds, that we have to communicate a lot. So we issue quarterly reports on engagement, on all kinds of things that we're doing in terms of sustainability. And we try to organize sessions with the boards of these pension funds as well on a biannual basis to actually show them what we're doing. I think for a lot of other asset managers, it's a bit more complicated because they have many clients. But I think that's the first thing you can do, is try to see how you can get also the pension funds involved into the decision making there. Yeah.
There was a second question over there. Yes.
Thanks. Ms. Lindemann, I have a question for you. Yesterday we had a talk about the activists and the investors actually who are claiming a seat in the supervisory boards. What is your opinion about that? Is it something that we should do, or is it something that we should try to avoid? And if there is a sheriff of the boardroom, in the boardroom, as we called it yesterday, how do you ensure, or what can we do to ensure that those activists or the sheriff on board is actually discussing and making choices and making decisions without any burden or, let's say, required consultation
or conflict of interest? Yeah.
Excuse me?
Or conflict of interest.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a possibility, of course, when you hold a certain percentage in a company, you can actually be nominated to the board. So there's laws actually in the Netherlands, but there's also a lot of laws in Scandinavia where actually this is occurring a lot more. So in Scandinavia, as a financial institution or investors, you can be nominated to the nomination committee of the board. So basically you have the possibility to be accepted to the nomination committee, and then you can actually pick and choose also board members. In my view, that's, the nomination committee I find a bit strange, because yes, we get a say on the board members, but in the end it's board members that we favor. And that's where we see a conflict of interest arising, because we can then pick and choose basically board members that, well, basically have certain experience, have certain powers, etc. But for us, we see this as a conflict of interest, so we've never accepted a seat on the nomination committee for that reason. Supervisory board is a different role, right? Because it's a role that's actually broader, because you can actually say something about the nomination of board members, but you can also say something about the functioning of the management board or the functioning of a company. So we see there are basically the possibilities to actually have a seat on the supervisory board. But if we do, we would restrict ourselves from trading into the company. So for us, we have sort of set up compliance procedures that if we step into a company on the supervisory board for whatever reason, we will restrict ourselves from trading, so that we make sure that we don't arise into a conflict of interest on that level. I think that's an important element to always keep in mind. We are, on our equity portfolio, we're not active in any boards because of the trading restrictions. On our alternative assets, we are. So for instance, we have a mortgages portfolio where we are active in boards. We have a smaller alternative portfolio where we're also active on boards. There is a lot more possibility there to have influence. Yeah.
There was a follow-up question in the back. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Wei from the University of St. Gallen. So I think it's a very great insights from all of you, and it does reminds I think very great insights that I didn't realize it was about 35% of the market. I mean, the market are dominated by the big passive index funds, and it triggered my my recollection of a proposal put forth by Oliver Hart from Harvard and Luigi Zingeles from the University of Chicago. So they were proposing that maybe there could be this kind of voting funds that vote against certain types of proposal or vote for certain types of proposals. So it kind of, I think, reconciles the fiduciary duties to shareholder, and perhaps also that to kind of address the well-being or shareholder welfare. That's what they call. My question for you is that whether you think that is a viable path or whether we should try to pursue that path.
Well, I think it's actually an interesting development, or actually an interesting thing to consider. My life is a bit easier. We're an active manager. We're not a passive manager, and for us, it's a bit easier to actually, say what we actually do, and then so we also vote down most of the remuneration proposals in the US because, it's basically way too exaggerated. So I think so my job in that sense, it's easy, but I do agree that there's a bigger world out there where we are a big asset manager in the Netherlands, but we're really small in the entire world, right? So, and especially compared to some of the US funds, or even funds in Scandinavia that are a lot bigger than us and have a lot more influence. I think there we have to also be honest that these funds, they are quite passive, and also their voting behavior is not always speaking for itself. So I believe it was actually BlackRock that announced that they will have a sort of, that actually their shareholders or their investors can actually vote by themselves on the funds, which is
that
actually...
was announced Thursday, so that was quite groundbreaking.
Exactly, which is a good development, because then actually the investors that are investing into the passive funds of BlackRock have a say on actually the voting behavior of BlackRock as well. So I think this type of development is actually a good one, where you actually definitely give also investors into passive funds a right to say something about the voting behavior at corporations.
Do you agree with that? Is it let me first start with the question, is it a good thing that passive investors holds now 35% of the US companies on average?
Whether it's good or bad, it's irrelevant. It happens.
Yeah,
okay. It's sort of like this is not something that we're not.
But it goes against
but the
Professor Edmund's theory that you
yes, but
pick up the winners of tomorrow. And
but the U.S. is not a regulatory society, so we're never going to follow laws that dictate anything of the order that you're suggesting. So to me, to contemplate a different universe isn't making any sense. If we can't, as an SEC, can't even pass things like this, disclosing the gender diversity of the board or disclosing what the company's doing on CSR, which have been passed by the EU decades ago almost. that tells you how little traction anything that smells of public policy will ever appear in the US. So getting back to this voting issue, I think the big issue which has gotten a lot of traction is the ISS and the proxy advisory firms, which are ISS and Glass Lewis in the US. So, and getting them removed from being the intermediaries. And I think that is a big concern, and the SEC is actually looking at that, because a lot of times they're the ones that are suggesting the voting behavior that you see in whether in the institutional investors. So that's a big issue. And I think it's an important issue that the investors are too removed from the actual voting behavior because of these intermediaries.
Yes, but 35% now on average is now held by 3 institutions: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street in the US. BlackRock now has announced that also the institutional clients can vote on their accounts. So it will break the dominance of these 3 major passive investors. Cynthia, do you think that is a good thing, or is it on the other hand also a positive thing that voting is concentrated with 3 institutions that are long-term investors in a company? What do you think?
Well, I think, as Margaret said, it is the universe that we live in. And the unfortunate fact, I think, is that in the United States, we have a completely dysfunctional federal political legislative system right now. And, well, maybe for the last 15 years. So we aren't going to get, we aren't going to get the Milton Friedman, laws that properly cause the company to internalize all of their negative externalities. So we look to investors to put pressure on companies to do the right things, which companies are doing in bits and pieces. But the better the better way for this to have happened would be to have legislation that then puts companies within each industry in some sort of level playing field, so we don't have to have investors saying, here's what we think you need to do. So, I think, in the best of all possible worlds. Now, we are actually, the SEC is going to be requiring more specific climate disclosure and more specific human capital management data. They've said they're going to do it by the end of this year. They'll bring forward their proposals. Then there's going to be a comment period, and then there's going to be a final rule, and then there's going to be litigation.
So quite pessimistic, I hear from the US side. I thought there was another question from the audience. Yeah, over there. Good. Oh, okay.
Hi, thank you. This is Miguel García Cestona from Autónoma in Barcelona. And I have, it was a question mainly directed to Margaret, but maybe the others also could answer back. I was curious because you were mentioning that this 2021 will be a record year in terms of mergers and acquisitions, executive compensation, and so on. And then you mentioned the Japanese example, that that's not true for the case of the Japanese, some Japanese companies. I was wondering if that could be, if you could expand a little bit more on that, because, I mean, to have this type of international approach, I mean, it's not only the US model or something like that. I think in Europe, we are much more affected by the US influence, but I was wondering if this type of differences with some companies coming from Japan, for instance, which are very international, may play a role, if it's some of the discipline could come from this type of competition.
It's a very interesting question. I think the US kind of stands alone in terms of, if you look at the executive compensation levels, the rest of the world is not anywhere close. But it isn't just executive compensation levels. Take a look at board director pay. I was shocked at how little board directors in Europe make. For how much work the job is, I'm not so sure I'd take it on. there's not a board director seat that I'm aware of that doesn't make at least 100,000 in the US. And that's for people who show up barely 6 times a year to do something, right? But getting back to your question, the rest of the world looks very different than the US on lots of things. And one of the big things is executive compensation. Japan is very much still a bonus and salary world. I think most of Europe still is pretty much that way too, where most of the pay is not stock option pay. I would not hold up the Japanese governance system as one to idolize. I happen to also do a lot of research in Japan and on executive succession, and that's a model that is so bad that the Japanese have even tried to change it 3 times, and they're in the midst of changing it again. You know, all you have to do is Google Toshiba, and you'll get a sense of how bad it is when the government colludes with the company to deny shareholders their rights. All right, which is what happened this past year, resulting in the president being fired. Japanese companies don't have CEOs; they have presidents, and the chairman being voted out, as well as the head of the audit committee being voted out. And now, Toshiba, which is a diversified firm, is going to be split apart due to investors' pressure. But there are some things that we can learn from the Japanese systems, is that they do try to protect corporations. They always have, and they always will. So I think sometimes when you look at the broader picture, the shareholder revolution that started in the 80s in the US sometimes can be very ruthless. And there are entire sectors of the US economy that have been decimated as a result of shareholder wealth maximization principles. And that made, you know, certain sectors you could argue maybe don't belong in the United States. You know, why are we still making shoes and clothing given our labor cost might be a good question. But then there are other sectors that you just wonder why, you know, the shareholder wealth push, what has that done to industry? The United States and Germany used to be the 2 world leading countries that produced machine tools. Machine tools are instrumental in advancement. China was built on American and German machine tools. And the United States no longer has a machine tool industry and hasn't had one in 15 years. We no longer make our chips. And what has happened, I think the world has seen what has happened when we're reliant on Taiwan for our advanced semiconductor chips. Intel, which was a large US and is still a large US chip manufacturer, the board and management refused to make the $5 billion investment for the next generation chip. And that is why we are dependent on Taiwan. So I had an interesting conversation last week about what would happen if China invaded Taiwan. And the Europeans all thought that the US would allow that to happen. And I said, you are kidding me. We do not have the next generation chip. How do you think our planes will fly? This is not a trivial issue. The next generation chips is what drives our Defense Department. So when you start to think about how interconnected we are and why we don't have an industry in the United States that's so critical to a lot of different industries, shareholder maximization resulted in not making investments we should have been making. So we're paying the price now. I'll just end there.
Farida, you wanted to chip in?
Yeah, maybe a comment on your question as well. And I think that a lot of European companies are definitely influenced by US companies as well. Whether it's on compensation, you see that a lot of companies are trying to compare their compensation plans with US companies, despite the fact that they're not active in the US, they don't generate profits in the US, they don't have board members from the US, they still want to compare themselves to US companies just to drive the compensation levels a bit up. So Rins and I had many discussions with Dutch companies on this matter, and it's always a very interesting conversation to have. That being said, I think in Europe, a lot of these companies are still influenced a lot by society. Because if you see what happens in the Netherlands when there's a front page news on CEO levels at ABN AMRO, yeah, the whole country is basically talking about it on social media. A lot of people are shocked about it because, yeah, it's something that is actually active in the Netherlands. We still believe that we have to, well, that the CEO level should be capped a bit. In France, you also have the same system. They are a bit more influenced by society. Scandinavia as well. So I think that is also pushing down the levels a bit more as well, because if it would have been up to the companies, we probably would have had the same levels as the US as well nowadays. Yeah.
Last question.
So maybe I have a question for you, Riens, as well. So the question is going back to the Netherlands and Farida, since you are very aware that let's say the Netherlands is very different than the US, and you are very much boots on the ground. I would like to hear from you. When you drop this term engagement, and what it is, what is your day job? What is exactly engagement? And is that very different if it's one of your big? I mean, I would assume that it's very different if it's one of your big investees as opposed to one of these small pension funds. But I know what engagement is in the US. What is engagement for you? And maybe both of you can respond.
Yeah,
You start.
sure. So what engagement is for me, I think for us it's basically in talking to our investee companies. So basically the companies that we invest in, but also the sovereigns that we invest in. We shouldn't forget that as well. We also invest in emerging markets. We invest in developed markets as well. So I think that's a big thing we have to recognize as well. Engagement is basically talking to a company on a certain topic and actually trying to achieve something, right? So what we also try to achieve is that companies improve in terms of sustainability. So for certain funds, we also expect that they improve on sustainability topics, and if they don't, we might divest from a company as well. So I think that's really the purpose of a conversation and also the aim of engagement. You can have dialogues, and that's a different type of conversation, and that's basically talking about financials and how companies performing and whatever, but engagement is really trying to achieve a certain target and milestone. Engagement for us in the Netherlands and in Europe in general, because our engagement's actually more focused on European companies than just Dutch companies, not so much US companies because our portfolio is relatively small there. But you see that that's actually, really trying to achieve something. The portfolio has expanded drastically over the past few years in terms of engagement because there's so many issues to talk about nowadays. I remember when I started at NN, and it was in 2019, 2017, it was actually, we had, conversation with about 50 companies. Nowadays, we have about 600 companies on our engagement list, where we actually speak on most companies on a biannual basis. If it's a big company that we invest in, or let's say we have in some cases 5 to 10% of stock in control, then we talk to them actually almost every quarter. So it's really trying to get companies to improve on certain levels. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, Eumedion is a collaboration of institutional investors here in the Netherlands, and we try to engage with all the majors in the Netherlands at least once every year, but that is dependent upon the specific issues that are at stake at listed companies. So, for example, with ASML, we have once every year a dialogue because, the company is running quite well. But with Royal Dutch Shell, we have almost every month a dialogue on the next stage of their climate transition plan. So it is really dependent upon the issues that are at stake at companies, but it is really important to have the contacts with executives, with staff, but also with the supervisory board or non-executives, also to build trust, not only in bad times, when a specific issue is at stake and where investors do not agree with, but also in good times to support their strategy and policy making. So that is important to continue that dialogue or engagement between investors and companies. So with that, Niels, I think we have to finish, unfortunately, this conversation about investors in time of disruption. I would like to thank the panelists. It gave insight on the gap between the US and Europe, I think. But positively, there is dialogue now going on between investors and US companies. That is a very good start, I think. And hopefully, also the ESG integration will become mainstream also amongst US asset managers and pension funds. So that on a positive note, I would like to finish this discussion, and a big applause to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Reens. Alpma, first of all, is the moderator of this panel, but thank you very much as well. All panel members, I think we learned a lot about engagement in the US and in the Netherlands. Also practice of engagement, really fascinating to hear. So thank you very much, all of you. You probably now know what the panelists get. So once again, 2 bottles of wine for each of you. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much. Because it's not over yet. We still have one parallel session to go. And you know, people who presented let's say the last panel, they have a difficult task because they're the last. They had to wait so long. So I invite everyone, also the ones, especially the ones who not have to present, to go to the sessions and listen to the presentations and have good questions. But before that, we have a coffee break.